This is Jim Cason with Riverbend Fellowship in Riverbend, North Carolina, continuing the series Things Which Were, Things Which Are, and Things to Come. This is week 12 in the series for November 22nd, 2020, and we are in Ezekiel in chapter 8. Again, we're studying prophetic things that have not been fulfilled. Now, in many ways, this prophecy was fulfilled actually during Old Testament times. However, like many prophecies, it also has application later in the age, and I think in this day and time in particular, when we're seeing wickedness greatly increase on this earth, including among so-called religious people, even those that profess Christianity, that this is very appropriate as a prophetic study. Starting with verse 1, I'm reading this particular time from the Amplified Bible. I will be going to several different versions for greater clarity in part of it. It came about in the 6th year of the captivity of King Jehoiachin, on the 5th day of the 6th month, as I sat in my house near Babylon, with the elders of Judah sitting before me, that the hand of the Lord God fell on me there. And then I looked, and behold, a likeness of a man, with the appearance of fire from his loins downward. He was like fire, and from his loins upward he had the appearance of brightness like gleaming metal, bronze. He stretched out the form of a hand and took me by a lock of hair on my head, and the Spirit lifted me up between earth and heaven, and brought me in the visions of God to Jerusalem, to the entrance of the north gate of the inner courtyard, where the seat of the idol, the image of jealousy which provokes to jealousy, was located. And behold, the glory and the brilliance of the God of Israel was there, like the vision which I saw in the plain. That's referring to last week our study in the first parts of Ezekiel. Verse 5, and then he said to me, Son of man, now raise your eyes toward the north. So I looked toward the north, and behold, to the north of the altar gate was this idol of jealousy at the entrance. Furthermore, he said to me, Son of man, do you see what they're doing? The great repulsive acts which the house of Israel is committing here, to drive me far away from my sanctuary. But you will again see greater repulsive acts. And this is a continuation of things that have gone on. The one problem with the one true religion is all the way through other religions and other beliefs have tried to insinuate them in it. I mean, at the time of Jesus and at the time of the early church, the Romans had no problem with your local gods. Oh, there were thousands and thousands of them, as long as you worship Caesar along with them. Worship the earthly king in addition to the heavenly king. That was also true 400 years ago in England, at a point in time approaching the first Thanksgiving, which is this coming week, in which Queen Elizabeth and King James both, now earlier, the Church of England had broken off from the Roman Church, and they had set up the Archbishop in England as their leader instead of the Pope, spiritually. However, the King or Queen of England was also considered to be above even anything that was worshipped in the Church of England. And we found this to go along all the way since. So what we're seeing right here is in the temple. Now, I want you to take this to what Jesus had to say and what the New Testament has to say about the temple of God. Yes, there was the ancient tabernacle, and then there was the temple that Solomon built, and then there was the rebuilt temple that was rebuilt on the return from Babylon, and then there was the Herodian temple, and that got destroyed by the Romans in AD 70. But this is talking about a different temple. What is a temple to a Christian? It's your own body. It should be the temple of God. And you should not be doing things that are repulsive to God in your body. And yes, I know we are all sinners. We are all guilty. Thank God we have Jesus to redeem us. So continuing on, verse 7, then he brought me to the entrance of the courtyard. Now the courtyard was where the people themselves could go, and of course the priests could go in the ancient temple. When I looked, behold, there was a hole in the wall. There wasn't supposed to be any holes in the wall. Even with the tabernacle, the wall around it, which was admittedly made so it could be carried, was not supposed to have holes in it. Verse 8, he said to me, Son of man, now dig into the wall. And when I had dug into the wall, behold, there was an entrance. Verse 9, he said to me, Go in and see the wicked, repulsive acts that they are committing here. So I entered and I looked, and I saw every kind of creeping things and beast and loathsome things, and all the idols of the house of Israel carved all around on the wall. You know, that's still a problem in us right now. We have this place inside us that's a God-shaped hole that nothing but God can fill. And that's the innermost part of our temple. It corresponds to the Holy of Holies in the old temple. And that was the space for God alone. But we have these repulsive habits of putting other things, stacking them around the wall. And no, for the most part, people nowadays don't put the idols of ancient Canaan there. We don't find too many Baals there. We don't find too many of any of the other ones that they had at that time. There's not too many Ashtoreth there. Not in physical form like those idols looked physically. But how about spiritually? Now, this particular thing about Baal was the worship of Baal involved child sacrifice. That certainly goes on in this modern world. Well over 50 million unborn babies have been killed by abortion. Spiritually, it's the same thing. Continuing on. Ashtoreth. Ashtoreth was corresponding to Diana of the Ephesians and other female deities who led people into sexual perversion. Well, nowadays you can kind of hide that away some from the outside world and other people. You can sneak on your computer or your tablet or your phone, and you can find all kinds of repulsive, creeping things and beast and loathsome things going on there. And you can bring those in your temple. Okay. So, let's continue on. Let's find out what was going on with all these idols stacked around the wall. Verse 11. Standing before these images were 70 elders of the house of Israel. And among them stood Jezaniah the son of Shaphan, the scribe, each man with his censer in his hand, and a thick and fragrant cloud of incense was rising as they prayed to these gods. So what's that trying to tell us? Incense all the way through in Scripture was a symbol, spiritually, prayer. It was a thing that was used in the temple. In fact, there was a particular combination of spices to make an incense that the ancient Israelites were forbidden to make for any other purpose than for the use of worshiping God. And I'm sure along the way, a bunch of that got used in worship of others too, because that's one of the problems with these evil hearts us people have, is we tend to dilute the one true God by mixing in a bunch of things we want. It could be fame and fortune. It could be the love of money. Money in itself is not condemned, but the love of money is the root of all evil. It could be the lust of the eyes. It could be the lust of the flesh. It could be the drawing of the world, instead of realizing that each one of us is supposed to be a pilgrim. Yeah, you hear a lot about pilgrims in the American Thanksgiving holiday. Well, we're supposed to be pilgrims too. But the innate meaning of a pilgrim is not somebody that goes to a particular earthly place. I've made a pilgrimage, I have a certificate for it, to Jerusalem. It was handed out. The mayor signed all these things at the time when I was there in 1985. Among the Muslims, they described that each man that can possibly do it during his lifetime should make a pilgrimage to Mecca. But that's not what the Bible's talking about here. What the Bible's talking about was the original sense with Abraham, back when he was Abram. And see, Abram was commanded by God to leave his home and his family and to go, and God didn't tell him where he was going. He just said, follow me. And you know, God still leads that way today. We know where it's going to end in the long run, but he sure doesn't tell us along the way where we're going. Oh no, we're supposed to follow him by faith. So let's go back and see what's going on with this big, thick, fragrant cloud of incense. Verse 12. He said to me, Son of man, do you see what the elders of the house of Israel do in the dark? Each man in his secret room of carved images. And that's a verse I want to pay particular attention to, because out of all the translations, the one that to me really makes it clear, and this is not always true, but the original King James Version of Ezekiel 8:12, I'm going to read to you. Then said he unto me, Son of man, hast thou seen what the ancients of the house of Israel do in the dark? Every man in the chambers of his imagery. That's a big clue right there. For they say, the Lord sees us not. The Lord has forsaken the earth. Okay. Where is my secret room of carved images? Where is your secret room of carved images? It's in the mind. The chambers of your imagery. We get occasional glances that we remember pieces of from our dreams. That's where that comes from, is the chambers of your imagery. I don't know about you. I've not had perfect vision during my life. I've not had stereoscopic vision because my left eye was blinded when I was 5 years old. But my dreams, some of them that I can remember and everything, I mean, it is like a CinemaScope widescreen production in ultra high definition with Dolby sound and wall to wall all the way around you, just like you're living in it. Aren't some of your dreams that way? Well, that's the chamber of your imagery. And the chamber of your imagery can be entered in dreams, but the chamber of your imagery is also entered in your imagination, because as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. And the heart is deceitful and desperately wicked above all things. Okay. Well, the Lord doesn't see us. The Lord's abandoned the land. How many of those things have you done? I know I've done things in my life that I would have gotten in big time trouble over if other humans had known about. But guess what? Even if humans didn't know anything about it, guess who knew? Yeah, God. God knows. You can't sneak anything by around God. You can't go high enough. You can't go low enough. I don't care. You get yourself in a submarine and go down to the very bottom of the sea. Sorry, he can still see you. You get yourself in a spaceship and you go out past Earth beyond the orbit of the moon all the way to Mars, he can still see you. If you could hop a ride on Voyager 1, that thing is jillions of miles away now. It's a distance where it takes years for the radio waves to get back here. Sorry, God can still see you. because he is the God of the third heaven, and the third heaven is above the second heaven, which is outer space, and way above the first heaven, which is where the birds fly. Okay. Verse 13. He also said to me, yet again you will see even greater repulsive acts which they're committing. And then he brought me to the entrance of the north gate of the Lord's house. And behold, women were sitting there weeping for Tammuz. Tammuz was one of the ancient goddesses, and it was a goddess in particular that appealed to women. It was from the culture, not the Hebrew culture, but it was from the Canaanite culture. And it was another one of the fertility gods. You know, to get any fertility, they had a whole bunch of fertility gods. It must have been just one of them couldn't get the job done. Kind of like it was when all those prophets of Baal were jumping up and down and hollering and cutting themselves and just being laughed at because, hey, they couldn't manage to attract Baal to, light up that sacrifice. There is no real power there. That's the worst thing of all about it. I mean, you're doing all this to something that's like a chunk of wood or a chunk of metal or a chunk of stone. It can't do diddly squat for you. Sorry about that, but that's the way it is. So, they're doing that. Verse 15. He said to me, do you see this, Son of Man? Yet you will see even greater repulsive acts than these that they're committing. So he brought me to the inner court of the Lord's house. Now the inner court had a significance in the tabernacle and had a particular significance in the temple. All of the Israelites could go into the outer court. And it was even permissible by the time of Herod's temple for non-Jewish people to go in that outer courtyard, as long as they were respectful. But the inner court was reserved just for Jewish, and just for Jewish men, actually, at that point in time. But you had to be a Jew, otherwise you could be put to death for being in there, because you had the outer court, then you had the inner court, then you had the holy place, and ordinary Joes couldn't go in there at all. You had to be one of the priests to go in there. You had to be born a son of Levi to get in there. Of course, our royal priesthood is not of the Levitical order. Our royal priesthood is of the order of Melchizedek, as it points out in the book of Hebrews. Because Christ, our high priest, entered once for all to make sacrifice for all. It doesn't have to be done over again. And all of us now are priests of God. You don't have to wear any special habits. You don't have to have a cassock. You don't have to be a preacher. You don't have to be what the Romans and the Episcopals called a priest. If you're a Christian, you're supposed to be a priest along at the same time, at least to yourself, and then to your family, and then to others. Okay, now we're at the inner court. Behold, at the entrance to the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the bronze altar, were about 25 men with their backs to the temple of the Lord and their faces toward the east. And they were bowing down toward the east and worshiping the sun. If you were admitted to the inner court, your whole purpose of going there in Old Testament times was to go up with your offering to the bronze altar and to present it to the priest, to put your hand on its head while it was, and kill it. And then the priest took it and sacrificed it on the altar, and it was divided up according to how the Old Testament said. You weren't supposed to have your back to the temple of the Lord. How about that? Worshiping the sun. You know, we still see a lot of that today. You ever check your horoscope? Now, you talk about an ungodly thing. Or you ever mess around with tarot cards? That's a knowing them ungodly things. You're worshiping the sun, you're worshiping the moon, you're worshiping the stars. You're worshiping the created objects, not the Creator, like you're supposed to be. Verse 17. He said to me, "Do you see this, Son of man? Is it too slight a thing for the house of Judah to commit the repulsive acts which they have committed here, that they have filled the land with violence and repeatedly provoked me to anger? And behold, they are putting the branch to the nose." Now, that expression, the branch to the nose, that's an idiomatic expression, which if you check it out with your English professor, an idiomatic is something that's spoken in one language that doesn't really directly translate to another. There are certain things that we say commonly down here in the South that the far northerners, they don't have a clue what you're talking about. There are certain things, if you came from Harker's Island and down east, that you'll use, like the lady that told me one time, "I don't hardly know how I can hoist that aboard." I tell you, it took me a minute or two to figure out what she was saying. Not to mention trying to translate it into French or German or Hebrew or some other language. So putting the branch to the nose, well, kind of a rough idea on that, if you put it in American street language, is giving them a Bronx cheer. That's about the same equivalent. That's what they were doing to God. He don't appreciate it. "Therefore I indeed will deal in wrath. My eye will have no pity, nor will I spare them. And though they cry loudly in my ears, yet I will not listen to them." Starting a little bit in chapter 9, "And then in my vision I heard him cry out with a thunderous voice, saying, 'Approach now, executioners of the city, each with his weapon of destruction in his hand.' And behold, 6 angelic beings came from the direction of the upper gate which faces north, each with his battle axe in his hand, and among them was a certain man clothed in linen, with a scribe's writing case at his side. And they entered and stood beside the bronze altar. And then the glory and the brilliance of the God of Israel, the cloud, went up from the cherubim on which it had rested, to stand above the threshold of the temple. And the Lord called to the man clothed with linen, who had the scribe's writing case at his side. The Lord said to him, 'Go through the midst of the city, through all of Jerusalem, and put a mark on the foreheads of the men who sigh and grieve over all the repulsive acts which are being committed in it.'" Oh my gosh, is that true today? I know there's a lot of things politically that one person like me can't do. We can't stop a lot of things that ought to be stopped in this country. We can't start a lot of other things that can't be started. But by golly, we can at least sigh about it and grieve over it and try to convince others. And if they listen, then well and good. If they're saved, even better. Because then they can join us in grieving over these repulsive things that we see going on all around us, and that are going to increase in these latter days. But there's another little section here, right after these people get marked. Verse 5. "To the others I heard him say, 'Follow him throughout the city and strike. Do not let your eyes have pity, and do not spare any man. Utterly slay old men, young men, maidens, little children, and women. But do not touch or go near anyone on whom is the mark, and begin at my sanctuary.'" That is where judgment begins. That's what the entirety of Scripture teaches. Judgment begins at the house of God. And if you're feeling judged now, and if you're feeling like you're going to really be severely judged during these next upcoming years in this country because of your faith, and you're going to get tried and tested. Yes, you're going to get tried and tested. But stand forth, prevail. Stand through the end. When you get where you can't stand, you may have to be laying on the ground, but you don't have to bow down and worship the idol. Do it God's way. In the United States, Thursday is Thanksgiving. This will be the 399th Thanksgiving. The Mayflower happened to land 400 years ago in the United States. God willing, I will be presenting a talk on Wednesday night. And the church service is going to be online, and I'm going to be talking more about the first Thanksgiving. Technically, I guess that's incorrect. It certainly wasn't the first time somebody thanked God, but I'm talking about the first kind of official Thanksgiving in the United States. I do plan on streaming that as well as the church streaming it. In fact, that will probably be our study next Sunday. It does seem like a little departure in some ways from where we're going with our study of prophecy, but I promise you it's worth the time. Now, thank you very much for listening. Have a blessed day. The Lord be with you in the name of Jesus. Oh, I almost forgot something. We got some prayers need done. The very first one on the list of our local congregation is our senior pastor, Pastor Steve. He's got a particular medical issue right now that I can sympathize. I've had this one brief time, and I've had doctors tell me that it is the closest that a male will ever approach the amount of pain that it is for a woman to give birth to a child. That's right, kidney stone. This, by the way, is not male exclusive. It can happen with either sex. Pray for him. Pray for this to be over for him and him to prevail and the pain to cease. Pray for Armenia and Artsakh. Artsakh is reduced to about half its original size. That means roughly half the people in that country have had to flee. They don't have anywhere to go. They're refugees. They're trying to, accumulate in the other part of Artsakh and to Armenia. And the people in Armenia, the soldiers that went there to try to help, the families that have been disrupted. Pray for all the folks, particularly down on the Gulf of Mexico, that got hit by all these hurricanes and the flooding this year, and the flooding, for that matter, in central North Carolina. And among our congregation, Tiffany Pegram and Louis Eames, Bonnie Grenier's brother, those are being treated for cancer. Bessie Trahan, Jim Peace, and Gladys Cox. They have other issues. The Etheridge family on the passing of their patriarch. Nancy Holsworth, Charity Huffman's mother. John Hurt. David Phelps, our mission director. Pastor Buford Lewis and his family. And Cliff Fledge and Lynn Ayers. And pray for our government in this country. That's a Bible commandment. That's not just me. Pray for your leaders. You may not be able to change everything they do, but pray for them. A lot of these leaders, if they were to become converted to Christ, it would make a big difference. And you have a blessed day. Bye-bye.